Homesteaders, Gardeners, and Cooks. My name is Jennifer. Welcome to Miles Away Farm. Thanks for joining me in my kitchen. Today we are making teriyaki turkey meatballs. And this recipe is originally from Cooks Illustrated. And I am one of those people that will basically make an entire meal over some random half of something that I have left over in my fridge because I really hate to waste food. And this recipe just got me all excited because it used three things that I had in my fridge or that were in my pantry that I've been wanting to use up and making sure that I don't keep them for a super long time. One of those was ground turkey. Just before Thanksgiving, we ended up butchering quite a few turkeys that we had. We ate one of them that was young for our turkey dinner, but the rest of them were quite old, 2 or 3 years old, and they would not have been good as a roast turkey because they were old enough that they would have been super chewy. And so we ended up taking all of the meat off the bone and just grinding it. So we have quite a bit of ground turkey. This recipe originally called for ground chicken, but I thought ground turkey would be a great mix. Secondly, it called for mushrooms. And last year I got some mushroom compost from a local mushroom place, and it ended up producing a bunch of mushrooms. We ended up dumping it in a pile, and it sat there through most of the winter, and then in the spring it sprouted a whole bunch of mushrooms. And so I ended up with a bunch of oyster mushrooms from that, just kind of accidentally, and I had way too many to use, and so I ended up sauteing them and throwing them in the freezer. My husband is not really a mushroom person, and so I needed a way to use some of those mushrooms where they weren't just going to be chunks of mushrooms like on a pizza or in a soup. And so this recipe ground up or finely chopped the mushrooms, and I thought that would be perfect because for him it's really a texture thing. And so this has got mushrooms in it, and then also cabbage. I ended up growing quite a bit of cabbage last year and was looking for a way to preserve it, and so I ended up slicing it in kind of 1-inch cabbage steaks and then blanching it and then throwing it in the freezer. And we've been using it here and there in stir fries and things, but this called for 1.5 cups of cabbage, and I thought that's perfect for the frozen cabbage that I have on hand. So great use of some pantry staples that I happen to have on hand. Hopefully it's delicious. I've never made this particular recipe before. And then we're just gonna stir fry a bunch of frozen veggies that we also have on hand as a side. And I'm hoping it's gonna be delicious. Come join me. So I'm using my 12-inch cast iron skillet here with a little bit of grapeseed oil. And in go the mushrooms and the cabbage. Both cabbage and mushrooms have a lot of moisture, and so a lot of this sauté is just trying to get some of that moisture out of it. I am terrible about mise en place, which is getting everything ready to go before you actually start cooking. And so while that's cooking, I am going to peel and then grate a knob of ginger. I'm using my rasp grater here. Lots of different ways that you can do this. It's a little fiddly, but it makes for a really nice fine ginger. And I would guess that I had probably a tablespoon or so. And then of course we need some garlic. My homegrown garlic is getting kind of late in the season. Everything's starting to sprout and I'm getting down to some smaller cloves. I decided to hand mince this rather than put it through a garlic press this time. You can see our mixture here is starting to dry out and get a little bit of color on it, which is what we want. I'm adding a teaspoon of salt, which I should have added at the beginning. And that's just going to help draw out additional moisture. And then we're making our teriyaki sauce while that's cooking as well. And so this is a tablespoon of cornstarch, a tablespoon of rice wine vinegar, 1/3 cup of mirin. And mirin is a cooking wine, and it's sometimes hard to find. A little bit of water, some soy sauce, and some sugar. And I cut down on the amount of sugar that this recipe called for. I think it was originally 3 tablespoons and I just did 2. And I'm just gonna give that a really good stir. Be sure that your cornstarch doesn't stick in the bottom. Once that's sauteed down a bit, you're gonna add in your garlic and ginger and just saute that long enough to where it becomes fragrant and we get some of that raw garlic flavor out of there, so less than a minute. And then this is always the problem with this skillet. I love this skillet, but it is so heavy. And so it's very hard to get things out of just because I can't really easily hold it with one arm and scrape with the other. I don't quite have the wrist strength for it. And then into that same skillet goes our teriyaki sauce. And we're just gonna cook this until it thickens up. Be sure that you've stirred it enough that you don't have a bunch of sugar stuck on the bottom when you pour it into your skillet. And then as this comes to a boil, that cornstarch is just gonna cause it to thicken. This is a really nice, simple homemade teriyaki sauce. It was quite good. And they originally had you leave the teriyaki sauce in the skillet. I decided to separate it. I'm adding 3 tablespoons of that sauce to our cabbage and mushroom mixture. And then in goes our homemade ground turkey, 1 egg, homegrown of course. It called for panko breadcrumbs. I just used regular breadcrumbs because I didn't happen to have panko on hand. And then some cilantro. This is optional. You could leave this out if you wanted to, if you're not a cilantro person. And then it called for 4 scallions. I didn't have any scallions on hand, so I'm just using this red onion in lieu of scallions. And I'm just gonna dice it really fine. That kind of stuff is fairly interchangeable. So our onions and cilantro go into our turkey mixture. You want to do that once your cabbage mushrooms are fairly cooled off so you're not cooking the turkey. That's a tablespoon of sesame oil, a little bit of black pepper, and then it called for a slightly beaten egg, so I just beat it with my fingers because I didn't want to fuss with a second bowl. Get everything mixed together just like you were doing a meatloaf. And then divvy out. It originally said this made for 48 meatballs. Those are really small meatballs, and so I ended up with about 35, and they're probably about a tablespoon each, give or take. I should have sprayed this tin foil down, and I forgot to do it. They did release, but it wasn't quite as nice as it should have been. And then they get stashed in the fridge for an hour to firm up. So this recipe is a little bit fussy in that sense. Preheat your oven to 400 degrees. And then these go into a hot oven for a total of about 20 minutes. You want to put them in for 10 and then rotate your pan and put them in for another 10. Once your timer has gone off, out they come, a little steam bath there, and that's all there is to it. All of the veggies on this plate came from the garden. They were all from frozen veggies. And I just poured the teriyaki sauce over this serving because we have 2 more servings. And so I wanted to keep it separate. And then a nice sprinkle of sesame seeds. This was a good recipe. I would make it again, but I think if I made it again, I would like double or triple and freeze the meatballs just because it is pretty fiddly. It's a lot of chopping and mixing. And so if you like it, it'd be better to do it and have extras. But yeah, a fun weekend meal and a nice way to use up some things I had in my freezer. Thanks for watching, Tribe. If you like this kind of content, give me a thumbs up, leave me a comment, and subscribe. I have new content coming out every week.